آله وصحبه ومن والاه يوم الدين. نويت تعلم والتعليم والتذكر والتذكير والنفع والانتفاع والإفادة الاستفادة الحث لتمسك كتاب الله سنة رسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم والدعاء على الهدى والدلالة على الخير ابتغاء وجه الله ومرضاته قربه وثوابه سبحانه وتعالى. سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله كله القوة العظيم. عدد كتب أكتب أبدا العابدين وداهر الداهرين. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. وحسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العظيم. اللهم إني أعوذ بك من أن أظلم أو أجهل أو يجهل علي. اللهم أغننا بالعلم وزينا بالحلم وأكرمنا بالتقوى وجملنا بالعافية يا أرحم الراحمين يا أرحم الراحمين يا أرحم الراحمين. طيب, so we are picking up where we left off in the book, The Essentials of Islam. You guys covered the obligations of Salah. You guys covered the intention. You guys covered entering with Takbiratul Ihram or saying Allahu Akbar. And you guys also covered reading the Fatiha while you're standing, right? And bowing in the ruku' and making sure you're still wearing the ruku', correct? You guys all covered that last week. And you guys covered as well, right? Coming back up from ruku' into your standing position, and it's called i'tidal, right? So remember when you guys, for example, when someone is praying, you know, they're standing, they read the Fatiha and the Surah, they make ruku', they have to come back up. Okay, you have to come back up and you have to be in that standing position after ruku', just for the extent of saying Subhanallah before you can go into your sajda. So we're going to resume the obligatory obligations of Salah and wrap that up today, inshallah ta'ala. So in summary, the obligations of Salah are taken from a specific hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where a man came to the masjid of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in Medina, and he prayed a specific way. However he prayed, it was a bit rushed, it was a bit hasty, but he prayed it however he prayed, right? And then when he was done, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam looked at him and said, you know, pray again, because what you did isn't prayer. You know, what you did right there is not considered a complete prayer or a proper prayer. Pray again, okay? So he prayed again, okay? Similar to how he did it the first time. And he came back and the Prophet said, pray again, because that is not a proper prayer. So he did it again. And he came back and the Prophet said, you know, pray again, that's not a proper prayer. And then the Prophet, and this man, he looked at the Prophet and then, you know, he said, Ya Rasulullah, like, okay, this is all I know. Teach me how to pray, okay? I'm praying the best of my ability, but you're telling me it's not right, so then please teach me how to pray properly. So then he began to illustrate for the man how to pray, and this hadith is where a lot of these integrals of prayer are taken from. He told the man, right, to make takbiratul ihram when you first start your prayer by saying Allahu Akbar, to stand, okay, and to read the Fatiha, and then to go into ruku' and to be still in ruku', okay, and stillness is considered, you know, being, you know, still for the duration of how long it takes you to say Subhanallah. Even if you don't say it, to be still in the ruku' for that duration. So if you just go in and out really quick, it doesn't count. Okay, you have to go in and be still for the duration that it would take you to say Subhanallah, even if you don't say it. And it's sunnah to say in your ruku', Subhana Rabbi al-Azim, right? That's sunnah to say in your ruku'. If you don't say it, it's fine, but being still in your ruku' is obligatory. To come back up, he told him, again called the i'tidal in Arabic, to come back up to a standing position after your ruku', after your bowing, and being still in that is also an obligation. And then going back into sujood, prostrating, okay? So prostrating, putting your head on the floor, okay? Once with the stillness, again for the duration of Subhanallah, all right? And then coming back up, it's into a sitting position, going back into prostration a second time, all right? And then coming back up to a standing position, and all that is considered one rak'ah or one cycle of prayer, okay? So in all these integrals you guys are seeing here, almost all of them are taken from that specific hadith, okay? That specific hadith. So in the book, going back to where we left off from last class, he says returning to the upright position, or what's called i'tidal in Arabic, and then pausing there for a few moments, right? This is the next integral of prayer, right? So you've made your ruku', you've bowed, you've come back up into i'tidal, or a standing position, and you have to pause there for at least for the duration of how long it takes you to say Subhanallah, which is just a second or so. If you don't fulfill that criteria of pausing in your standing position, your prayer is invalid. Okay, so some people, it's rare, but you'll find people sometimes, they'll be in ruku', right? And they'll just go straight into sujood. Right? And you ask them why, and they're just like, you know, they're just kind of tired or lazy or something, you know? If someone physically can actually go back up, that's a different story, right? But if you can and you choose not to, your prayer is invalid, right? So if if you bow, you have to come back up. Again, stop for a split second and then go back into sujood. So to come back up is necessary. To pause in that is also necessary. Then he says prostration or sajda twice. That's also an integral. So making sajda twice is an integral of salah. Okay, making sajda is pretty straightforward, right? We all know what that means. It means putting your head on the ground and your hands are on the ground and your knees and your feet are on the ground. There's a hadith of Prophet ﷺ, he mentions the limbs that are necessary to be on the ground for sajda. He says your two hands or parts of your two hands, even if you just have a few of your fingers, but you have your two hands, okay? Your knees, all right? And the insides of your toe, okay? The insides of your toe. So imagine, right? Imagine someone is making sajda, right? This is their feet, right? So their foot is like that, okay? Their foot is like that, all right? If they make sajda and their feet are floating, they're holding their feet in the air, okay? In our madhab, in the Shafi'i madhab, that sajda is invalid. In some other madhab, it counts. It's okay. But for our madhab, your feet have to be on the floor when you make sajda, such that, like, imagine the bottoms of your toes, they're touching the ground, right? So your toes, right, like the closest part to your toenails, they have to be on the ground, okay? So you can't have your feet floating up. You can't have your feet like that while you're making sajda, where the outside of your feet are resting on the ground. You have to have your toes curled a little bit, where the bottoms of your toes are on the ground. So you have your hands, your knees, and those bottom parts of your toes on the ground, all right, when you're making sajda, okay? And you have to have your forehead on the ground as well. And your forehead must be bare. Okay, so some people, right, you'll notice this, for example, with kids, right? Like they might wear their kufiya like really low and it'll reach their eyebrows, okay? If someone makes sajda like that, like there's a physical barrier, like a cloth or kufiya or something on their forehead, and they make sajda on that, again, that sajda doesn't count, right? So your forehead has to be bare, all right? And it has to be on the ground. It has to be pressing on the ground, okay? You can't, sometimes you want to be praying somewhere like outside or something, and you look and it's a bit muddy or dirty, and you just kind of hover your forehead over the ground. No, that doesn't count either. You have to press your forehead into the ground. And again, there has to be no barrier between your forehead and the ground, okay? The cloth on the floor is okay, right? Like the prayer mat on the floor, the carpet on the floor is fine. It's only if you're wearing something, right? If you're wearing something on your head, right? Or a part of your clothing, for example, like that. Imagine someone makes sajda on their sleeve. That's where it is bad for your sajda, okay? So make sure you have your bare forehead on the ground, okay? And it's sunnah as well to have your nose touch the ground as well. To have your nose touch the ground while you're making sajda. So your forehead's pressed into the ground, and your nose is also on the ground, okay? Your nose is also on the ground, all right? So that's the next obligation, right? To make sure you make sajda twice. And again, you have to make sajda in a way where you pause in your sajda for the duration it takes you to say subhanallah. So even if you don't say anything, you don't have to say anything when you make sajda, but you have to at least be in that position for the amount of time it takes you to say subhanallah, which is again just about a second or so, okay? It's sunnah to say when you make sajda, Subhana Rabbil A'la. Subhana Rabbil A'la 3 times. Okay? It's sunnah to say that 3 times. If you want to say more, you can do that, right? But the minimum is to say that 3 times while you're in sajda. So 3 times in the first one and 3 times in the second one. Okay? All right? And it's also obligatory to sit between your 2 sajdas. So if Allah wants us to make sajda twice, there has to be something that separates the 2, right? And that thing is sitting down. So you make sajda once, then you sit back up, right? You just sit, all right? And you make it again, all right? And again, your sitting has to have, you have to be sitting in for as long as it takes you to say subhanallah, okay? Even if you don't say anything, you can be silent, but you have to at least be in that sitting position between your 2 sajdas for the duration it takes you to say subhanallah, okay? So he says in the book, prostration twice, and sitting between the 2 prostrations, pausing is necessary in all of these. So this pausing for the amount of time it takes you to say subhanallah is necessary in every single integral, okay? Whether it's standing, making ruku', standing back up after ruku', making sajda twice, sitting between 2 sajdas, this is mandatory in every single one. Okay, so he says one must fulfill the above obligations in each rak'ah. So doing everything that was mentioned before this, from entering reading the Fatiha while you're standing to a ruku' or prostration or bowing. Standing back up after bowing, making sajda twice, right, with the sitting in between. That all constitutes one complete rak'ah. Okay, one complete rak'ah. All right. Right. So as you guys know, after every 2 rak'ahs, we sit and we recite something, right? So for example, after Fajr, it's only 2 rak'ahs anyway, right? So after Fajr, after 2 rak'ahs, we end our prayer. We recite what's called tashahhud, right? And we recite the salawat upon the Prophet ﷺ, and we give our salams and we're done, okay? In Dhuhr, for example, you have 4 rak'ahs, right? In Asr, you have 4 rak'ahs. In Maghrib, you have 3. In Isha, you have 4 as well, okay? After 2, every 2 of those rak'ahs, we sit. After the first 2, we sit and we recite tashahhud as well, right? And then we get back up when you finish the 3rd and the 4th if necessary, okay? That sitting, that first sitting, he talks about it now. He says, the first tashahhud and the sitting during this part of the salah is sunnah. So that first sitting between the 2nd and 3rd rak'ah in Dhuhr, Asr, Maghrib, and Isha, that sitting is not obligatory. So if someone chose not to do it, their prayer is valid. Okay? So let's say, for example, someone forgets to do it because they just forgot, or they chose not to do it on purpose, their prayer is completely fine. Okay? It's a strong sunnah, you should do it. You should recite the tashahhud and sit down between the 2nd and 3rd rak'ah. But if you don't, your prayer is valid. Okay? Or for example, you could be in a scenario where you're praying behind an imam and he forgets to do it. Okay? Which happens sometimes, right? You're praying behind an imam, he forgets to sit after the 2nd rak'ah, he gets straight up from the 2nd to the 3rd and starts the Fatiha and everything, right? Forgot about it completely. Just follow him. Okay, just follow him. All right? And you rest assured that sitting, that tashahhud, the first tashahhud is sunnah, it's not obligatory, it has no negative effect on your salah. Okay, your salah is still valid. Okay, so he says the first tashahhud or the first sitting between the 2nd and 3rd rak'ah, tamam, is sunnah, it's not obligatory. The second one though is obligatory. The second tashahhud that we do to end our prayer, okay, that is obligatory. So you have to sit and you have to recite what's called tashahhud during that sitting. And you have to give salawat upon the Prophet ﷺ during that sitting as well. Okay, and then you have to give salams to end your prayer. So after 2 rakats of Fajr, after 4 of Dhuhr, after 4 of Asr, after 3 of Maghrib, after 4 of Isha, okay, at the very end, we have to perform, okay, that second or that final tashahhud. Okay, that second or the final tashahhud. Okay, and so you sit down, you have to be sitting, okay, and you recite the following. He mentions for you in the book here on page 22, the minimum tashahhud that fulfills the compulsion is what? التحيات لله سلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته سلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأن محمدا عبده ورسوله. تمام? That's the minimum you have to say to have a valid tashahhud. You can say more. There are narrations that discuss more, longer narrations, right? You can say that if you want, but the minimum is to say that. To say التحيات, okay? To say التحيات لله سلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته سلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأن محمدا عبده ورسوله. Okay? So you're sitting down and you recite that at minimum. And then afterwards you recite salawat on the Prophet ﷺ. The minimum you have to say is just say Assalamu alayka. Tamam? You say Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. That's the minimum. To say Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. Again, it's mentioned for you guys on page 22 of the book. He says the minimum prayer on the Prophet, peace be upon him, is Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. If you say that, you're done. You can give your salams, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and you finished your prayer. Okay? And you finished your prayer. And again, you can say more salawat if you like. Okay? A very well-known version of salawat to say in prayer is what's called the salawat of the Abrahamic salawat, where someone says, you say, Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad, abdika wa rasulika an-nabiy al-ummi, wa ala ali Sayyidina Muhammad, kama sallaita ala Ibrahim, wa ala ali Ibrahim, innaka hamidun majid. Allahumma barik ala Sayyidina Muhammad, abdika wa rasulika an-nabiy al-ummi, wa ala ali Sayyidina Muhammad, wa azwajihi wa dhurriyyatihi kama barakta ala Ibrahim, wa ala ali Ibrahim, innaka hamidun majid. Again, it's a longer version. It's not mentioned in the book, but the minimum is just to say Allahumma salli ala Muhammad, and you're done. Okay? And you say Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and your prayer is done. You can also, it's sunnah also to add du'as if you would like after you doing salat upon the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So reciting Quranic du'as or du'as in Arabic that are narrated in hadith, you can also mention those. But this is now the minimum prayer that we've covered. Okay? The minimum prayer that we've covered. Okay? So the minimum prayer, to just go over it, okay? If someone wants to have the absolute minimum to have a valid prayer, what would it be? It would be you go up, for example, you're facing the Qibla, okay? And you make an intention. For example, you're going to pray Dhuhr, okay? They say, I intend to pray Dhuhr. I intend to pray the Fard of Dhuhr for the sake of Allah Ta'ala. Allahu Akbar, right? They do that. And even raising the hands is sunnah. It's not obligatory, right? So let's say they don't even raise their hands. They just say Allahu Akbar. They've entered their prayer now, okay? They have to recite the Fatiha. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Malik yawmiddin. Iyaka na'budu wa iyaka nasta'een. Ihdina as-sirata al-mustaqim. Sirata alladhina an'amta alayhim. Ghayr al-maghdubi alayhim wa lad-dallin. Ameen. Allahu Akbar. Okay, and even the saying Allahu Akbar to go between motions is sunnah. So they can stay silent and they just go into ruku' immediately, right? And they just pause there for a second and they get back up. Pause there for a second, go into sujood. Pause there for a second, sit back up. Pause for a second, make sujood a second time. Pause for a second, get back up, do a second rak'ah, okay, the same way. Do a third rak'ah the same way, and they can skip the first tashahhud. Do a fourth rak'ah the same way, and at the very end, recite the tashahhud al-akhir, the one we just mentioned. التحيات لله سلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته سلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأن محمدا عبده ورسوله اللهم صل على محمد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله السلام عليكم ورحمة الله, and they're done. The minimum prayer. So all you have to do are those specific motions, and all you have to say is Allahu Akbar to enter your prayer, Fatiha and rak'ah, right? And tashahhud al-akhir, and you're done. And the salawat upon the Prophet and the salams, and you're done. Okay? So it's a very, the minimum you need to fulfill to have a valid prayer is not that much. It's not that much. Okay? So he says now, one should do all the sunan. There are many. So there's a lot of sunnahs one can perform when they pray. A lot of sunnahs. Okay? Let's start from the beginning. Bismillah. Here are some sunnahs one can do when they start praying. Okay? The first sunnah is to raise your hands while you say Allahu Akbar. The way you raise your hands, okay? Raise your hands. Make sure your palms aren't don't hold your fingers together like this. And don't do that either. Keep them normal, okay? Keep them normal. Just raise them up enough where your thumb would get close to your earlobe. It's like parallel to your earlobe. Just do that, and that counts, okay? So you would say, for example, so you start the raising motion as you start saying Allahu Akbar. So you say Allahu Akbar. Okay? Allahu Akbar. All right? That is a sunnah, to raise your hands when you start your salah. Your salah. Okay? After that, it's sunnah as well to hold your hands, okay? Kind of between your belly and your chest. Okay? Where do you hold your hands? So you have, for example, you have your left hand, okay? Keep it not like that and not super spread out, just like normal, okay? What comes naturally to you. Put your left pinky right above your belly button. Okay? Put your left pinky right above your belly button, and then grip your wrist with your right hand. If you do that, your right hand will end up directly below your heart. All right? It'll just naturally happen. Okay? So put your left pinky right above your belly button and just grip your left wrist with your right hand. And if you do that, khalas, your hand is right below your heart. And to hold it like that while you're standing, okay? While you're standing, that's also a sunnah. This is for men and for women, okay? This is for men and for women, okay? It's sunnah as well to recite an opening dua before you recite the Fatiha that you guys have covered, or you will cover if you haven't already, in the glorious treasure. Okay, it's sunnah as well to read a surah after the Fatiha in the first 2 rak'ahs of every prayer. Okay, so the first 2 of Dhuhr, Asr, Maghrib, and Isha, to recite a surah after the Fatiha. And obviously, Fajr is only 2 rak'ahs, to recite a surah after that as well, after each Fatiha as well. Okay? That's also sunnah, but it's not obligatory. Okay? طيب, it's sunnah as well to say Allahu Akbar every time you change positions. When you go from standing to ruku', okay? When you go from, standing to sujood, between sajdas, it's sunnah to keep saying Allahu Akbar. Except for when you come up from ruku' to standing, it's sunnah to say what? Sami Allahu liman hamida, Rabbana wa lakal hamd. Okay? So you say Allahu Akbar to go into ruku', and when you come back up to stand for a second or two, you say Sami Allahu liman hamida, Rabbana wa lakal hamd. Okay? So those dhikrs you mentioned to transition from motion to motion are sunnah, they're not obligatory. Okay? It's sunnah as well to make dhikr during each position. So when you're in ruku', you make dhikr, right? You say Subhana Rabbi al-Azim. Okay? Saying it 3 times is sunnah. All right? And then when you're in sujood, to say Subhana Rabbi al-A'la. Okay? Subhana Rabbi al-A'la. 3 times. I'm pretty sure these are all mentioned in the Glorious Treasure. Okay? These are all mentioned in the Glorious Treasures. The various adhkar you can make, the dhikrs you can make during the various positions of salah. Okay? Okay. Yes. So those are some more sunnahs. The sunnahs of sitting in salah. Okay. So this just has to be demonstrated on it, obviously. So to sit in salah, there are various ways you can sit in salah. Okay. When you have to sit in salah, any way you sit fulfills the obligation. Even if you sit cross-legged, okay. Even if you sit, on your knees, as long as you're sitting, it fulfills the obligation. Okay, as long as you're sitting on the ground, it fulfills the obligation. But there are certain ways of sitting that are sunnah. So what are those? I'll demonstrate for you guys right now. The first way of sitting is a way of sitting that is specific to every sitting other than the last tashahhud. So when you sit for the first tashahhud, when you sit, for example, between sajdas, it's sunnah to sit like this. Okay, it's called iftirash. So you would sit, I'll show you sideways and then you can see my back as well. So you sit, you sit on your knees like this, right? And you keep your right toes curled. And you sit on your left foot like this. Okay? Like this. And this is obviously, like we said, this is for every single sitting in the salah except for the very last tashahhud. Okay? So when you sit, for example, for the first tashahhud between the second and third rak'ah, when you sit, for example, between 2 sajdas, it's sunnah to sit like this. Okay? It's sunnah to sit like this. Okay? Now, some people, if it's difficult to sit in that way, for whatever reason, right? You're just not used to it. Like, you just can't do it. You're not flexible enough. It's okay, right? Just sit whatever in the way that makes you that's comfortable for you. Okay? That's comfortable. Can you guys see in the back the way I sat? Yes. Okay. So if you want to sit like some people sit like this during all the sittings of salah because it's easier for them, that's fine. It's completely okay. Your prayer is valid. But if you can sit the way I showed you the sunnah way, try. And even if you're inflexible, just try. You can get used to it over time. But the final sitting in tashahhud, it's sunnah to sit in a way called tawarruk, which is it's like this. Okay? It's like this. So sideways, it looks like that. Right? And in the back, it looks like this. Okay? Basically, what you do is, your right foot is folded, right? It's curled. Your toes are curled like that. And your left foot is under your right foot. And your bottom's on the ground. Okay? And your bottom's on the ground. Does that make sense? Yeah? Your bottom's on the ground. And again, if it's hard for whatever reason, you don't have to sit that way. Right? You don't have to sit that way. Sit whatever is comfortable for you. Especially, if you're just physically unable to, or, it really takes away from the focus of your prayer. Just sit and whatever is comfortable for you. Okay? Okay, so those are the ways to sit when you're praying. It's sunnah as well. It's sunnah as well when you make tashahhud to raise your finger. Okay? So when do you raise your finger and how do you raise your finger? When you say, if you guys go back to the part we talked about the minimum tashahhud, when you say, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, when you say Ashhadu an la, you raise your finger. Okay? So when you start your tashahhud, you just keep it like that. Your thumb on the side, okay, of your pointer finger and your pointer finger out, and just keep it down like that. Like the way you'd keep it on your knee or something, right? On your thigh. And then when you say Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, you raise your finger and you keep it up until you give your salams, or until you stand up if you're in the first tashahhud. Okay? Does that make sense? And it's sunnah as well when you give salams to turn your head. It's sunnah to turn your head when you give salams. And the way to do it, the sunnah way, is if when you say Assalamu alaikum, face straight forward. So you say Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Okay? So in the first part, when you say Assalamu alaikum, keep looking straight or keep your face forward. Okay? All right? And then when you say wa rahmatullah, just turn your head enough where if someone was behind you, they can see your cheek. Okay? You don't have to, you don't have to do that. Okay? Just turn it enough where if someone was behind you, they can see your cheek. All right? And left again as well. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Okay? And again, if you don't have to move, if you don't turn your face, then your salams is still okay. All right? There's a really funny story. There was a congregation. They were praying behind an imam. And for whatever reason, they got upset with him. I don't remember the exact reasons, but they were upset with him for whatever reason. And it was like a Maghrib or Isha or something, right? And they all conspired, the congregants. They were like, okay, this time when he reads the Fatiha, we're not going to say Ameen out loud. All right? And I'm sure you guys have noticed, it's just common knowledge amongst the Muslims that the louder and stronger you say Ameen, the more likely your prayer is accepted, right? It's just something, people love to say Ameen really loud when they pray, okay? It's like as if they think that the louder or stronger you say it, the more likely your prayer is accepted. In reality, it has nothing to do with that, but people like to say it really strongly and loudly, okay? So the Imam is praying and he says, وَلَضَّالِينَ, and he's waiting for that Ameen from behind him, okay? Nothing. Silence, okay? All right? And he's just thinking, okay, I'll get them back, all right? At the end of the prayer, what does he do? He reads the last tashahhud, he does salawat, and he just whispers to himself, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. He doesn't turn his head, okay? He doesn't raise his voice, he just walks up and leaves. Yeah, walks away. And everyone's just sitting there wondering, what's going on, okay? So the turning of your head is a sunnah, it's not obligatory, right? Saying Ameen out loud is a sunnah, it's not obligatory. Raising your voice to say salams or something, right? Or to say Allahu Akbar as an imam is sunnah, not obligatory. In any case, the bare bones of the salah, right, just to have a valid prayer is quite straightforward. It's very easy. And when we teach people how to pray, whether they're children or anyone, someone who's learning for the first time, teaching them like this in a way where, you teach them the basics first of a valid prayer and then add to it gradually over time is a wise way to teach them, because then, they're not overwhelmed with so much to do and keep track of while they're praying. Okay? Then he talks about the outward of the prayer, right? He talked about what it means to have a valid prayer. Now he says it is also required that one humbles oneself with total sincerity, making it an action solely for God alone. So it's obligatory for someone to be sincere in their prayer. Okay? So what does he mean by that? He means, for example, if someone prays for other than the sake of Allah Ta'ala, or someone, for example, like they want to impress somebody, okay, and they pray to impress somebody, for example, right? That prayer, right, the box has been checked. You don't have to make up that prayer, okay? But whether it's accepted or not, whether you get reward for it or not, is a different story. You get rewarded based on your level of sincerity. So if someone's not sincere when they pray, they're praying to show off, they're praying for something other than, for the sake of Allah Ta'ala, plus they've prayed, they've ticked the box, they don't have to make it up, but their level of reward is diminished, right? It's made less, okay? So having sincerity is very important to maximize your reward with Allah Ta'ala. That's the first thing, okay? The second thing is concentration. He says concentration is also required. In Arabic, it's called hudur. He says hudur is being aware of what one is saying and doing. So concentration in prayer also affects how much you get rewarded. If someone's not concentrating while they're praying, their reward is diminished, right? You prayed, you check the box, you don't have to make it up, but how much do you actually get rewarded? Okay? You get rewarded based on your sincerity and your concentration. So what does concentration mean? He defines it. It's to know what you're saying and doing. Like how many times, right, do we know someone who might have prayed, right? And they have no idea what the imam said or what they even said, right? Just motions, right? And they might even forget, am I the second or third rak'ah? You know? Point is, right, being aware of what you're saying and aware of what you're doing is called concentration in prayer. And that influences your reward, okay? Influences your reward. Or we can also call it having presence in prayer. Having presence in prayer, okay? So we talked about sincerity or ikhlas in Arabic, concentration or presence called hudur in Arabic. And now he's going to talk about what's called, he called it submissiveness, right? In Arabic, it's called khushu', okay? He says khushu' is also required, okay? So khushu', again, it's something that influences the reward of your prayer, not the validity. Some scholars say if you're not present and you're not, there when you pray, you don't have khushu', your prayer is invalid. Some scholars say that. That's a minority opinion. For the vast majority of scholars, as long as you prayed properly, it counts, okay? And these things that we talked about, sincerity, concentration, and khushu', all these things are just determine how much reward you get, okay? Which is great for us because how many people, right, pray without any sort of khushu' or concentration, If we were to take the minority opinion of the scholars are the one that we were to take, right? For most of us, most people, their prayers would be invalid, So it's from the mercy of Allah Ta'ala that He hasn't made these things a condition for the validity of prayer. He's only made it a condition for how much reward you get. So when he says submissiveness or khushu' is also required, he's talking about how much reward you get. Khushu' is the stillness of the limbs, concentration of the heart, and pondering upon and trying to understand what is being read. So having khushu' in salah, right? Having a sense of, like happiness or presence in your prayer, okay? It consists of having your limbs still, making sure your limbs are still, right? What does that mean? It means, you're not fidgeting, you're not scratching, you're not just like playing around with something, okay? There are actions you can do that can actually break your prayer, and we'll cover that in the next section, inshallah. But even actions that don't break your prayer, doing it nullifies, right, your presence and your reward. Okay, your presence in prayer goes down, and your reward goes down as well. So to be still is a very important part of maximizing your reward in prayer and maximizing your presence of heart. There's a hadith Prophet said, he said there was someone praying, and this man, he was fidgeting when he was praying. And the Prophet said, like, if his limbs were to be still, then his heart would be tranquil. Okay? If his limbs were to be still, then his heart would be tranquil in prayer. His heart would be present. So stillness of limbs is important. Okay? That's the first step to having, okay, this sort of presence and khushu' in prayer and maximizing your reward. The second thing, he says concentration of the heart, right? Which you mentioned previously, right? Knowing what you're saying and knowing what you're doing. And pondering upon and trying to understand what is being read. So even not just knowing what you're saying, but also pondering and reflecting upon it. Okay? So for example, I could know that I'm reading the Fatiha. Okay? But I might not be reflecting upon the meanings. Okay? And so reflecting upon the meanings means what? It means knowing what you're reading, like, in detail, the meanings in detail, which means for most of us, it means knowing the translation, right? Knowing the translation of the Fatiha, the translation of the surahs you're reciting, the translation of the afkar you're doing throughout the salah, right? The wisdoms behind them, reflecting upon it while you're praying and pondering upon it. All that leads to having a greater sense of khushu' or submissiveness before God and maximizing your reward. So he says God accepts salah according to the amount of hudur, according to the amount of sincerity and concentration and submissiveness, right? According to those three, our level of reward is determined. Okay? And there's no limit. There's no limit. Okay? Your reward in salah, there's no limit to how much you can be rewarded, right? Because there's no limit to how present you can be. There's no limit to how much reflection you can have. Okay? So then when you pray, right, your prayer can be worth a lot of reward. Right? And even someone's prayer, like even if they've still quote unquote mastered their prayer, right, there's still more. Right? There's still more presence of heart, and there's still more reflection that can be done. He says showing off, or what's called riya in Arabic, showing off, which is acting for the sake of people in prayer and at all other times, is forbidden. So showing off means, for example, praying for the sake of someone else, right? Someone prays, for example, for the sake of someone else. Someone elongates their prayer for the sake of someone else, right? Someone's praying and someone walks in and they want to impress them, right? And they start reading a long surah, long sujood, long ruku', right? Just to impress someone else. There's a story of someone, he there once was someone, again, he was trying to impress someone in the masjid, and he elongated his prayer, right? And the person in the masjid was like, MashaAllah, right? He just said MashaAllah out loud, right? The person praying just turned to him and said, I'm fasting too as well, right? Point is, yani, in doing things for the sake of others, right? Okay, it can nullify all reward. Khalas. It's forbidden, it's haram, but also, khalas, your reward is gone. You're not doing it for other than Allah Ta'ala. Okay? So your reward is gone. Okay? Your reward is gone. Okay. But the next section, do you have any questions, by the way? No questions?
Like, you were talking about making mistakes in Salah, right?
Yeah.
So in the Hanafi method, if you have like frustration or forgetfulness, is there anything like that in the Shafi'i method?
There is. So the brother asked about what do you do if you make a mistake in Salah? This isn't covered in this book, right? The short of it is that if you make a mistake in Salah, right, as long as you have the skeleton of your prayer okay, what we just mentioned, right? All the integrals are there. You don't have to do anything in the Shafi'i madhab. Okay. Does that make sense? So as long as you have your prayer that we mentioned all there, you've made ruku', you've made sujood, you've read the Fatiha every rak'ah, the skeleton of it is all sound. The integrals are all there, but you made a small mistake, right? Let's say, you forgot to do tashahhud, the first tashahhud, right? You forgot to do it, you stood straight up, right? Or you forgot to do qunuts in Fajr. Or you forgot, something else that's a sunnah, okay? As long as the integrals of your prayer are all there and they're all sound, you don't have to do anything, okay? You can make sujood as-sahu, prostration for forgetfulness. If you forget certain things, right? It's sunnah to do so, but if you don't do it, again, your prayer is valid. It's fine, right? And it's kind of a long lesson. If we go into it now, the time wouldn't be enough for it, honestly. You guys will cover it, inshallah, in the next book you guys cover in fiqh in the Rabat program. Okay? All right. طيب, so he says acts that invalidate the salah. Okay? He says deliberately speaking invalidates the salah, even if it be only 2 letters, as does a large amount out of forgetfulness. Okay, so there are certain actions, if you were to do them, it breaks your prayer. Okay, you're considered to have left salah. Why? Because salah, obviously, it's a specific ibadah, it's a specific form of worship that has a specific form to it. Okay? If you do something that contradicts that form, you've left the prayer, right? You left the prayer. The first one he talks about is speaking. Okay? So if you speak intentionally in salah, it can break your prayer. When can it break your prayer? If what you said, again, intentionally, okay, is comprised of 2 letters or more. Okay? 2 letters or more, even if it doesn't make sense. Okay? So someone goes, ooh, right? That's 2 letters, right? There's like an A and an O, right? Or a Hamza and a Waw, ooh, right? Someone goes, boo, right? None of that makes sense. It's gibberish, right? But if they were to say that deliberately, let's say they're crying while they're praying, right? Or they're just making noises, it breaks their prayer. Okay? It breaks their prayer. All right? Or they could say something on purpose that's 2 letters or more and it makes sense. They can say, for example, they can say ma, like referring to their mother, right? Or pa, referring to their dad, right? That would break their prayer. If they say something that is comprised of only 1 letter and it makes sense, and it's an actual word, okay, that makes sense, it breaks their prayer as well. Okay? So for example, in English, I guess the examples are few, but in Arabic there are a few cases where if someone says a 1-lettered word, it break your salah. Like if they say qi, that's a 1-letter word in Arabic, it makes sense, it would break their prayer. In English, it's kind of rare. Nothing really comes to mind right now. But if it does exist, right, it would break your prayer. So speaking deliberately in prayer breaks your prayer. If it's 2 letters or more, what you said, or if it's 1 letter and it has a meaning to it. Okay? But if you speak, okay, by accident, okay? If you speak by accident, sometimes it'll break your prayer, sometimes it doesn't. When does it break your prayer? It breaks your prayer if what you said is considered a lot of speech or not. Okay? What's considered a lot of speech? More than 6 words. Okay? More than 6 words is considered a lot. Okay? So if you speak by accident, 6 words or more than 6 words, tamam, it breaks your prayer. Okay? If you speak by accident, right? It's unintentional. You forgot you're praying, right? Or it's just, your tongue, it just came out, right? If it's 6 words or less, it doesn't break your prayer. Right? It does not break your prayer. Okay? So if it's not intentional, but it's more than 6 words, it definitely breaks your prayer. It's just too many words. Okay? It's like having a conversation while you're praying. All right? But if it's by accident and it's 6 or less, it does not break your prayer. Okay? It does not break your prayer. And this is taken from a hadith of Prophet ﷺ, where he was praying with his companions. And he prayed Dhuhr, I believe, and he prayed 3 instead of 4. Okay? After praying 3 rak'ahs, the Prophet ﷺ did taslams, right? He was sitting with his companions. And then one of the companions, his name was Dhul Yadain, which in Arabic, it means, in English would translate to, and then the one with the 2 hands. And they called him that because his hands were really long, they said. Like he had really long arms. They called him the one with 2 arms. Okay? Anyway, so this companion looked at the Prophet ﷺ. He said, "O Prophet of God, did salah become shorter or did you forget something?" He's trying to be polite. Like he prayed 3 instead of 4. Like all the companions knew that 4 rak'ah is what Dhuhr is, but the Prophet ﷺ prayed 3. So one of 2 possibilities now. Either Prophet ﷺ forgot to pray a 4th rak'ah, or it's been changed, right? It's been changed and they just haven't learned about it yet. So he asked politely, he said, "Did you forget to pray? Did you forget something? Or is there a new ruling you haven't told us yet?" Right? And the Prophet ﷺ looked at him and he said, "Neither of them." Okay? Neither. Like I haven't forgotten and it hasn't been changed. The Prophet ﷺ thinks he's prayed 4 rak'ahs. Okay? And the man continues to look at him and he says, "No, one of the 2 must have happened." Right? Meaning like you prayed 3, either you forgot or the ruling's been changed. Okay? So they're having a conversation here. Okay? A conversation here. And the Prophet ﷺ turns to the rest of the companion and he says, "That is what he's saying true." Right? And they all say, "Yeah." Affirming that, yeah, you only prayed 3, not 4. So what did the Prophet ﷺ do? He just got straight back up and he prayed a 4th rak'ah. Okay? And why did he do that? Because the conversation that occurred, right? They didn't think they were in prayer, right? It's considered to be like they forgot, okay? Unintentional speech, and all of it was less than, say it was all 6 words or less. Okay? So they counted the words in this dialogue between the Prophet ﷺ and that man, and they came out to 6 words or less. Okay? 6 words or less. So in summary, if you speak intentionally in prayer, right? If you speak intentionally in prayer, it breaks your salah if it's 2 letters or more, right? Even if you're just crying. Someone's crying, they're so moved by what they're reciting, but they're making noise, right? They're intentionally making noise with their mouth. It would break their prayer if it's comprised of 2 letters. If they're going like ooh, it breaks their prayer. If it's unintentional, if it's a lot of words, more than 6, it breaks their prayer. If it's not a lot of words, 6 or less, it does not break your prayer. Okay? All right. If you're overcome with something while you're praying, okay, it does not break your prayer. What's an example of that? Like coughing, for example, right? Or clearing your throat. When you cough, those are letters, right? Like, right? Those are letters you form with your mouth, right? Even if you were to write it in English, like you put like something, H's or something like that, right? To express a cough. If you cough on purpose, it's broken your prayer. Okay? But if you cough because you're sick or it's just, your body just emitted a cough, you're fine. Okay? You're fine. All right? So something that happens to you that's out of your control doesn't break your prayer, right? Because you're sick, you sneezed, you coughed, right? You let out, a burp by accident or a yawn or something. All that is okay. It's only when it's deliberate that it breaks your prayer. Okay? So deliberately coughing, deliberately clearing your throat, okay, would break your prayer. Okay? Unless you're doing it because you have to recite something in salah. Okay? So deliberately coughing and clearing your throat breaks your prayer unless you're doing it to recite something that's obligatory in your prayer. And what are the obligatory recitations in your prayer? Your Fatiha and your Tashahhud in the end, right? And your Salat on the Prophet ﷺ at the end. Okay? So, for example, someone wants to clear their throat to recite a nice long surah, right? You can't do that. Because that clearing of your throat is too many letters, it'd break your prayer, right? Just don't recite your surah, move on with your prayer, okay? But you want to clear your throat to recite the Fatiha. Because the Fatiha is obligatory, you can clear your throat, no problem. You want to clear your throat to recite the last tashahhud, no problem, clear your throat, okay? But clearing your throat for other than those obligatory recitations is not allowed, okay? So in summary, right? Again, if you were to do something deliberate, make noise deliberate or speak deliberately, it breaks your prayer. But if it happens by accident, okay, if it's speech, if it's 6 words or less, it doesn't break your prayer. And if it's something that just happens because you're sick, because you sneezed or you coughed or something came up, it doesn't break your prayer either. Okay, it doesn't break your prayer either. Is that clear? Any questions? تفضلي. Snap at them. Yeah. Okay. Like emotion. Okay. I knew someone was gonna ask this. Where is it? Any other questions while I'm looking this one up? Okay. Yeah. So an action by your hand, right, shouldn't break your prayer, as long as you're not too many emotions. Okay. This will come. We'll talk about how many emotions are considered too many. A snap. If I were you, I would stick to like this, almost like a clap. Okay. That's less prone to like making too many emotions and potentially breaking your prayer. But like swinging your arm and snapping like that, that's a lot, But just smacking like that, or as long as you're not doing it too many times, like once or twice, should be okay. All right. Yeah. Okay. All right. So with that said, we'll close. We're going to pray the hood in a few minutes if anyone wants to freshen up or make wudu. We know with the fact that Allah give us tawfiq, seek beneficial knowledge and act upon it, accepts that from us, and give us tawfiq to spread all over the world. Makes our Prophet happy with us and rewards our teachers, our shuyukh, and our parents, all those who write upon us with a hadrat al-Nabi.